Good evening and welcome to our NISD Facebook Live. I'm proud superintendent of Northwest ISD, Dr. Mark Faust. Welcome this evening. We're going to talk about public school finance and in particular the Texas funding school crisis and how that affects NISD. But we have a tradition in our district where we start meetings with celebrations. So I'd like to take a moment, if you would permit me, to just talk about some of our student celebrations, some of the things that have occurred so far in this school year. Let's start with Northwest High School. Our CMP, our academy, has become the national champions, if you will, of the best daily live news broadcast show. They won that national championships and they are the reigning championships. Our CTE programs across the district, we have been designated as a district of distinction, which is a very prestigious acknowledgement for our career and technology education programs. All of our high schools, or all three of our traditional high schools and Steele Early College, we have 6 national merit finalists. All three of our comprehensive high schools have earned sweepstakes for student council at the state conference. And our Destination Imagination, elementary, middle, and high school all had programs or competition groups that went to state, and 3 of those went on to the global finals. Worthington Middle School, a brand new school, it's in its second year, has been identified as a Texas school to watch. And one of our students has really done something, our ag mechanics students at Eden High School, Riley Copeland. He won Supreme Grand Champion in ag mech at the Fort Worth Stock Show, won other stock shows, and has just crushed it with his autonomous mower that he's created. It's an industrial grade autonomous mower. And these are just a few of the academic successes. There's many, many more that are not on the list. For example, Steele Early College High School won district in the UIL academic competition for the first time. Besides our academic successes, extracurricular successes such as volleyball. Byron Nelson High School, you probably already know, were the state champions for UIL volleyball in 6A. Not only that, they were named the national champions by a couple of different Sports Illustrated Max Preps. They are #1 in the nation for volleyball this year. Wrestling, we sent 14 kids state qualifiers, and in swimming, we had 2 state finalists. Cross country, Byron Nelson boys and girls had state qualifiers, and Eaton had 1 solo qualifier. In golf, we had a state qualifier. TMEA, which is Texas Music Educators Association, we had 15 students on the band, choir, and orchestra ensembles as all-state ensemblists. VACE, which you may know is a visual arts competition, we sent 12 students to a really competitive, hard to get into VACE qualifiers for state. Our drill teams, all 3 of our comprehensive high school drill teams won national titles in their respective competitions. And technical design, which is theater arts theater arts technical design, we had 4 state qualifiers from Northwest High School. So those are just, again, a handful of academic and extracurricular successes that we've experienced so far. We're celebrating the successes of those students, and we know there are many others that are not identified here, and more to come because we got about 6 weeks left in the school year. Those kids that are involved in those extracurricular and those academic successes have great, incredible teachers and sponsors and coaches. A couple of those teachers that just are at the highest level of excellence that we recruit and try to retain in our district. Brittany Rocha, who's NISD Elementary Teacher of the Year this year, and David Wolf, Eden High School Social Studies Teacher, Secondary Teacher of the Year for NISD. Just a couple of shining examples of great things that our faculty and staff do for our kids. You probably know that Northwest ISD is one of the fastest growing districts in the state of Texas. If we could advance, there we go. Currently, we have just north of 32,300 students. We are the fastest growing district in North Texas. Can you believe 20 years ago, 2 decades, we had about 7,500 students in our district. We've gone from 7,500 in 20 years to 32,000 students. It's just incredible growth in the number of students, the number of faculty and staff, the number of schools, and the 234 square miles that we serve. Next slide. And that leads us to, we have been struggling, particularly since 2019 and the last time we had additional funding in basic allotment from the state of Texas in our budgets, in building our budgets. We're not alone. Districts from all over the state, Cypress Fairbanks, having to reduce more than 600 positions in their district and $77 million deficit. Our $16 million deficit, which our CFO, John Pastusik, is going to talk more about, Dallas ISD, Denton ISD, Eagle Mountain, Saginaw, Keller, Louisville, closing campuses. Those are all around us. McKinney in the DFW area. Round Rock from Austin, Socorro from West Texas, Judson, $48 million deficit from the San Antonio area and modifying and adjusting class sizes. We will post this presentation this evening, the slide deck. We encourage you, go click those links. Those are press releases or actual news stories from media outlets. And you can see that, again, this is not a Northwest ISD issue. It is a Texas school funding crisis across the state. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Jonathan Mastusik, our CFO, and he'll talk us through the different elements of funding with Northwest ISD and what's going on in the Texas funding crisis.
Thank you, Dr. Faust. Thank you, Dr. Faust. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. I am Jonathan Pastusik. I am the Chief Financial Officer for the district. I'd like to start off today by looking at what Dr. Faust called our rapid growth. If you see here, you can see since 2019, our population of students has increased by 27.3% in that 5-year period. The unique thing about Northwest ISD is the other populations, so our special ed population. During that same time period, it's increased 97%. Our emergent bilingual, 165%, dyslexia, 112%, and our economically disadvantaged, 67.5%. This is important information because some of these students require more services, and some of these services require one-on-one time. So when we talk about staffing, this rapid growth in our special populations is alarming. So because of our rapid enrollment, Northwest ISD adds staff to meet the needs of these students. As you can see, in the last 4 years, we've added 869 staff members to Northwest ISD. 91% of those are either campus-based staff or special ed staffing or support service staffing that is directly in the classroom. We focus our priorities to increase our staffing in the classroom. You can also see we've added about 9% in other positions that include security and maintenance, transportations, and district administration staff. I would like to point out one of the questions we get asked a lot is about our district administration staff. You can see we've added 12 positions. During that time, I think 4 of those were para positions to help us and support our staff. 3 of those were positions that were actually cut prior to those 4 years and we brought back because we had that much of a need. So it's really not an addition, it's a replacement. And then 1 or 2 of those were actually ones that were outsourced and were costing us more money, so we're able to bring those in-house and actually save money. So when you look at that, it's a very small number that we've added in the administration. We've really tried since 2019 to stay as far away from the classroom with regards to cuts and only add to help students. Why is this important? Since 2019, state lawmakers have not changed the base funding per student. It's been $61.60 since that time period. Inflation has dramatically increased with fixed cost, and these costs are essential to function and cannot be eliminated. So, with no new funding, that means we have no state funding that has been provided to give teacher raises. Districts have to modify our existing budget standards to provide raises. So that's what we've done since 2019. We've stayed as far away from the classroom as we could. In 2019, we did a really good job of basing our staffing on the current funding model that the state gives us. With no new funding and funding staying flat, we've actually had to make adjustments to that structure because it can't operate in that same method. I'd like to remind everybody of how funding works on our M&O budget versus our I&S. M&O stands for maintenance and operation. That is the budget of tax dollars that we receive that goes straight to salaries, utilities, and supplies. The interest and sinking budget is for buildings and renovations. So we want to make sure we understand that those are 2 separate buckets of money. The I&S money that we receive for buildings cannot be used for maintenance and operations. It is illegal in the state of Texas to use I&S fundings for operations. Today we're really focusing on the maintenance and operations. That's our operations budget. That's what we're talking about today, and that's what this legislative funding crisis or Texas funding crisis we're referring to. You can see that the M&O tax rate for Northwest ISD is 66.69. The I&S is 42.10. The next slide will show our history of our tax rates. So as you look at the bottom, you can see that is our I&S tax rate. That's for buildings. That has stayed relatively constant since 2015. If you look at the orange line, that is our M&O, or our maintenance and operations. That's the budget we're talking about today. You can see it was relatively consistent from 2015 to 2018. In 2019, the legislature passed House Bill 3, which said that they would compress our tax rate. So since that time period, the state tells the districts their tax rate. So since 2019, our tax rate has been compressed from $1.04 down to 66 cents. And then, of course, the blue line is those combined. I want to talk about this because Northwest ISD is the lowest tax rate it's been since 1993. It is also at the lowest legal tax rate in the state of Texas. So I get this all the time of school districts keep raising taxes. That is not accurate. We actually have the lowest tax rate and we've been decreasing it. What's happening is the values of people's homes are increasing faster than we are compressing the tax rate. Both the tax rate and the tax value is controlled by the state. So we have nothing in that tax equation that we control. Other than you can go out for what they call a voter-approved tax rate election. If you look at the next slide, you can see the districts around us that have the green checkbox have gone out for what we call a VATER, a voter-approved tax rate election. Northwest ISD did go out for a VATER in November and it failed. The districts with the green have already passed VATERs and have received the golden and or some of them the copper pennies that allow school districts to increase the funding. That is the only mechanism school districts have by state law to increase their funding through tax revenue. On the next slide, we look at the current 6160 that we've had as our basic allotment for the last 6 years. When I say basic allotment, I mean per student funding. That is what the state mandates that we get, and it's been the same since 2019. The current bill that has been voted out of the House and been approved, House Bill 2, shows an increase to that basic allotment for the first time in 6 years. That increased amount is $395. To match inflation since 2019, so the same number we were at in 2019, that number would have to be increased to $1,340. So the current proposal that's been passed by the House, it only meets 30% of that target goal. So what I'm saying is we are 70% the buying power less today, even if this bill passes, than we were in 2019. To show the impact of inflation, as you will, I picked a school. So we picked Medlin Middle School. From 2019 to 2024, you can see the enrollment has decreased by 1%. It's about a 7-student change. It's been relatively consistent. The size of that campus is the same, but the costs for that same campus have gone up dramatically. So if you can see, payroll costs are up 55%. The confusing part of this is it's not that we've added more staff. The actual numbers of staff are about the same. Other than in the special populations, we've needed more special ed staffing. We've needed more bilingual staffing. Those functions that actually push into the classroom. But the number of classroom teachers, the number of administrators have stayed the exact same. But we've also given some raises during that time period to stay competitive with neighboring districts to recruit and retain the best teachers in the area. So during that time period, our payroll costs have actually increased 53%. Over that 5-year period. Our utility costs for the same size building have increased 27%. That includes water, gas, your garbage, your utilities, all the utilities. So the cost of those have increased dramatically. The next one is our custodial costs. Custodial costs are up 40% in that time period. That includes the labor and the supplies needed to perform all the custodial functions. And the last one is not just Medlin. The property insurance for the district as a whole has increased 519% during that time period. So fixed costs, these costs are required to function, and our revenue has not increased since 2019, but yet you can see how much the costs have dramatically increased during that same time period. Another factor that comes into play is something we call unfunded mandates. The state will many times give us new requirements, and a lot of these requirements are good for students. For example, full-day pre-K. It used to be that we had to have half-day pre-K. Now we must offer full-day pre-K. Great for students. The difference, though, is the state only funded us for half-day. We do not get funding for full-day. So even though we're required to do it, we do not get the funding that goes with it. And you can see the discrepancy there. Special ed is another one. Lots of good for students. Special ed, though, is funded at a certain rate, and we did not get enough to cover those expenses in the last year. Armed security was a new mandate that came out 2 years ago. And in that, it said we have to have armed security at every campus. That cost about $2.9 million, but we only received funding for about 1.3. And then the last one's transportation at 13.9, but we were only funded 3.5. I'd also like to add on special ed and transportation services, the amount of funding we get for those programs has not changed since the 1980s. So it's been relatively stagnant since 1980, which again, we all know things are way more expensive than they were in 1980s. So, $16 million deficit. The question is, why? NISD adopted a $16 million deficit to maintain the current student programs, and we also wanted to provide teacher raises. But because of a lack of funding from the state and the VADER that we went out for in November, Proposition A, failed. That means we must make structural changes to address this shortfall and prepare for the insufficient state funding. This next slide is really important. What is a structural deficit? A structural deficit is a deficit that is composed of ongoing expenditures that are in the budget structurally, such as the cost of people and programs. They're not one-time expenses, so you can't just get rid of it for a one-time expense. So in 2019 and then again in 2021, Northwest ISD did a really good job of looking at the current funding model and developing a structure that would be sustainable if we were funded at the same levels. However, funding has been relatively the same, but inflation has gone through the roof. So that structure is no longer viable. So our hiring ratio, which is how many student to teacher ratio, our matrix of administration, and the efficiency make up that structure. That structure was viable with the funding from 2019, but because funding has stayed stagnant, it is no longer viable today. So that's what caused us to have a $16 million deficit. So we've had to restructure to get that deficit back to zero. On this slide, you can see some previous reductions. Since 2019, Northwest ISD has done a really good job of trying to stay as far away from the classroom as possible on any reductions. So the way they've done that is we've done an administrative hiring freeze during certain years. We've had contract reductions, utility efficiencies. We've reduced supply budgets and material usage. But all of these things are no longer enough to bring the cost savings necessary to eliminate that deficit. So, what are some things that we've looked at? One of the things we like to talk about is one-time adjustments. So if you remember in 2021, Northwest ISD had outsourced this transportation department. We brought that in-house. That move was able to save us about $3 million out of our budget. But that's a one-time deal. I can't go back and bring it back in-house again because it's already in-house. So that is something we can't do again. Another one that comes up a lot is just sell land. Northwest, you own some land, sell the land. Well, that works in some districts if the land was bought out of M&O. But in Northwest ISD, we've bought all the land out of the bond program or the I&S bucket. So if you sell it, it goes back into I&S. So it does not help the budget at all. Another one-time adjustment we did a couple years ago was we had our medical insurance outsourced. We also had a clinic. We had to get rid of that and go to TRS as our insurance. We were able to save another $3 million. But again, can't do that again. All that to say is we've done everything we can that are one time and or as far away from the classroom, but it's not enough. So what do we have to do? We have to change our structure. So that's where we've made a structural adjustment and changed our class sizes. Personnel composes about 80%, actually it's 81% of our budget. And then if you look at some of our outsourced operations like custodial, it's probably closer to 85 or 86% of our budget is people. So since it's such a big part of our budget, that's where we have to make some changes. This is primarily done through attrition. We did it through resignations and retirement. This year, to cut the $16 million deficit, our goal was to cut $13 million in payroll. We also had to reduce about $3 million in non-payroll, such as contract eliminations or reductions. Being that we've been doing this since 2019, that was a really big hurdle that I wasn't sure we would be able to get to and find $3 million within our budget. Looking at the restructure of the staffing side, we were able to take kindergarten through first grade. They were currently at 22 students. In 25-26, it will remain at 22 students. Second grade through fourth grade was at 22 students. Next year, we'll increase it by 2 students to 24 students. Fifth grade will remain at 25 students next year, just like it was this year. The biggest changes came in middle and high school. As you can see, middle school was currently staffed at 165 students a day, or 23.5 students per period. Next year, that number will go up to 180 students per day, or approximately 26 students per period. And then when you look at high school, it's going from 165 a day, or 27.5 students per period. We're increasing it to 180, so it will have 30 students per period in each classroom. Now, these class sizes represent what we call our hiring standard. That's how we know how many teachers we're going to hire. But that's all dependent upon enrollment at each campus. Elementary, we expect only 20% of the classes to be above 22 because of the number of students in each campus. So only about 20% of the classes should be at 23 or 24 students. Secondary is a little bit different. Because secondary classes are based on an average, some classes will be below the average and some of them will be above. So you could have some classes as much as 35 and some could be as low as 25. So it's really the average of the hiring standard. We didn't only look at the staffing at campuses, we had to look at everything else, not just teacher staffing. So we looked at leadership and administration, things like assistant principals, counselors. We also looked at changing some of our rotations at the elementary school, which then reduced the number of PE teachers, and it added the library to the special rotations. We reduced some fine arts sections as well as some athletic sections, and then we did some modifications or changes to our GT, ESL, and dyslexia programs, but maintaining a high level of educational opportunities for those students. So looking at our staffing reductions, you can see at the elementary level, we didn't add any or subtract any. If we would have stayed at our old model or our old structure, we'd have needed to add 26 elementary teachers next year. But by changing the structure, that we didn't need to add any. We would stay flush with the number we had this year. At the middle school level, changing from the old structure to the new structure, we actually had to reduce 23 teaching positions. High school, another 36 teaching positions. Support staff, 43 positions. Support staff would be positions that push into the classroom and help with special ed or bilingual or GT and all the other programs that we offer. We also reduced our AP and counselors by 10, our PE by 7, and fine arts by 15. So here was the original goal. The original goal for teaching reductions was 5.745. We believe we're going to get to that goal of 5.745. The original goal for administration and support reductions was $6 million. Currently, we're at $5.9 million. And then the non-staffing payroll of $3 million, currently we're at reductions of $3.3 million and continuing to work on that. So currently, our goal was $16 million, and our total reductions to date are at $15,034. So a $900,000 short of our goal at this moment. This last slide is talking about what's going on in the legislature. I think everybody's heard that House Bill 2 has passed the House. And in that was the funding increase of $395 that we talked about earlier. Each representative was giving a run for their districts provided by the state of what they projected those runs to look like in the dollar figures for each school district in their area. So we received one from one of our representatives, and here you can see the schools that are in that area that he represents. You can look at the current ADA funding, so you can see here where we rank, and currently we are the lowest at 9630. If you look at the proposed ADA, it would take us to 10,199, a difference of 569. You'll also see that we're very competitive with the amount of additional funding we would be receiving. The biggest difference, though, is the amount of proposed ADA funding as we compare to the other districts. So I like to look at Northwest ISD. We're at 10,199 in the proposed legislation, but if you look at CFB or Carrollton Farmers Branch, they're $2,000 more than us. The biggest reason, they have their golden and copper pennies and they've gone out for a Vader and passed it. The other big issue with this legislation is it's not finalized. Again, House Bill 2's only passed the House. It's still got to go through the Senate, and the Senate's version looks way different. So last time this went through 3 special sessions all the way into November. So we have no idea where we're going to land on funding. This is just one of the first case scenarios. So there's still a lot of information to go, a lot of legislature to meet and iron out all the wrinkles and see who gets what and how much. So it's really hard to make any decisions until we know that information. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Anthony and see if we have any questions or anything else we can talk about.
We do. We have a lot of great questions. Many of them relate to special education, and I'm going to tie 2 of them together. So going back to the example slide of Medlin Middle School that we used, you mentioned that SPED is part of that payroll increase. Can you talk a little bit about how we staff SPED? Is there a ratio like class size ratios? Do you add whenever you need more? How does that work?
So special ed is staffed extremely differently, mainly because it's based on the needs of the students. Some students need one-on-one. Some students can be in a group setting and maybe 10, 8, 12. It just depends on the needs of that student. So each student has to be looked at individually, and based on those needs, the staffing is based on that. Now there's a lot of legal requirements, so we have to fall within the legal law. This isn't Northwest just wants to give extra teachers. That's not it at all. We have to follow the letter of the law. So a lot of that's based on that. Some students, it even gets to a point that we may not even be able to provide services, and we have to outsource that and send them somewhere to get those services. And just one student, that can be over $100,000 in one student. So special ed students have a greater need, and it's a lot more expensive, and it's a lot harder to staff because we don't know until the students enroll what exactly you need. So a lot of times we have to wait till even August. We're still adding special ed positions.
That's a great point. And going back to SPED, there was a question of why hasn't SPED funding increased since the 80s? And can you talk a little bit about what the legislature is proposing in terms of the service intensity model, and will that get our SPED funding to where it should be?
Part of the reason I think special ed funding hasn't increased is I don't know that it's completely understood of how much it's increased, and that's a legislative concern. But the second part is it's what we call a weighted funding. So it's a weight on top of our basic allotment. So I hate to use examples, but if it's $6,160 for a general ed student, a special ed student might be $7,000 or $7,500, depending upon the weight of that, the severity of the need. Going forward, they've changed that model. The weights will be based on the severity of the need, but they didn't increase the amount of funding much. So students were all based on one single line of how much the weight was, and now some will be weighted less, some will be weighted more, but the amount of funding put into the program is very minimal. So again, I think the wash is going to be, it's going to iron out to be about the same. But some students that have more needs may get a little bit more funding, and some that don't need as much might get a little less, versus everybody got the same amount. So I think that's going to be a big change, but I don't think you're going to see any big change to the amount of revenue we receive. I think it's more of a shell game of how much each student gets.
So at the end of the day, you think that if this were to pass, we wouldn't be fully funded for special education, we would still be underfunded?
No, not even close. If I remember correctly, the state came out and said that we were $1.7 billion underfunded from the state just on special ed. I think this bill says $800 million in it. And again, I would say that 1.7 is still severely under compared to where it was probably back in the 1980s and how we got funded. So yeah, it's not even close to getting to that level of funding that's needed for special ed.
There was also a few questions about a VADER. So if we were to go out for a VADER again this November, so November 2025, if that were approved by voters, when would we be able to start making changes back to a few of the things that we've proposed to change in the fall?
It's a great question and a great point. So the way the VADER would work is if it passes, it would actually go into effect on this year's tax bill coming in January. So we would receive the money in January, February of 26. So a lot of those things that we could add back would have to wait till the next budget cycle. There may be some things that we can start to put back in place as we go, but that would be have to be looked at. The biggest problem, even with passing the VADER, and I think this is something that's very important, to get back to the funding levels we were in 2019, we have to add $1,340 to the basic allotment. Even with the VADER, we don't get close to that. So the new structure is probably here to stay with some changes. There may be some things that we can do, but not everything's going to go back. So I don't want to go out there and say we can put it all right back. That's not going to happen unless the state comes through with a lot more funding. But the VADER will get us closer to that and let us allow to put some things back. And of course, we would sit down and prioritize based on the amount of money it would generate. What of those things we could put back and how quickly we could put them back. But that's a lot of information before we even know what that dollar figure is, especially since we don't even know how much we're going to get in basic allotment, which triggers a lot of those numbers. So that's a lot of unknowns to be knowing at this point what we could and couldn't do.
So a VADER election would potentially go out in November. So the earliest that you think any changes could be made would probably be sometime later in the spring, most likely.
Most likely. There may be a few things you could put back, small things in January, February, but again, it's hard to really hire staff in February. There's not a lot of positions to go out and hire a teacher in February. They're already in contracts. So a lot of the major changes wouldn't really occur until the summer or the next budget cycle, but some of the smaller things we could probably put back in immediately and start to get back on course.
There is a great question about funding for food services. So would you be able to save money if you brought food services in-house? And how does that work with federal funding and all that?
So currently, we do a really good job on that. It's a federally funded program, and all of that money is in our federal fund. So it doesn't affect our maintenance and operations budget at all. Some districts have to actually subsidize their food service by pulling out of the general fund to pay for the needs of food service. But our group does a really great job of managing that with our partnership with Aramark. And we really actually have been putting money into the fund balance of food service. So it actually doesn't affect our operations. In fact, my food costs in our operational budget is actually zero because we do such a good job of managing it on the federal fund side, and it operates within that fund only. So it's a whole different bucket of money, and it doesn't have any effect on our operations. So to actually say it would save money when we're making money, I would say it's probably not a feasible option.
Gotcha. So there's been a few more questions coming in, and let me make sure I prioritize these. So one of them was about the Gifted and Talented program. Can you discuss kind of how that change will work? Because it's at the elementary level, and how that service model changed a little bit.
That's a little bit outside of my realm. I would have to lean on C&I. But what I assure you that they've told me is that the parents and kids will hopefully not even notice a thing of change. We're just changing the model of how they service them, and some of those GT teachers will push in and maybe have more students, but they will still be offering that program at a very high level and make sure that they are giving those kids the quality that they need in that program.
And one question that came in just a few minutes ago was about Chromebooks and laptop devices, and it goes back to something we had earlier on about the M&O and the I&S. Can you talk about how we purchase Chromebooks and laptops, and would that affect, if we just didn't buy as many, would that affect the M&O?
On the M&O side, no. One of the other things that's good about districts that have a bond program is anything that's a capital outlay stays in the I&S side. So capital outlay is big asset purchases. Chromebooks are one of those big assets that we buy out of the bond program, and we only finance it for 1 or 2 years. So it's not like we finance the Chromebooks over 30 years. That would be very fiscally irresponsible. But we're able to buy them in bulk through the bond program and actually save money on the M&O side. So each student gets that, and it would not save anything in our general fund budget.
Gotcha. I think that hits most of the questions that are in your realm. There are a few other questions that I will get with our other district leaders about, and I'll make sure we get answers for. But before we log off, is there anything you want to say before we turn it back over to Dr. Faust?
One of the things that we talk a lot about is this whole process has been very difficult. From 2019 to 2021, when we made some more cuts, to today, we've done everything we could to do. We look through 3 major lenses when we budget. The first one is protecting student programs, and we try to do that first and foremost. The second is compensation. How do we maximize our compensation to recruit and retain the great teachers that we have? And then the third is we've got to protect our fund balance. And partly because of that is you have to have that to be able to meet your financial obligations. We've done a really good job of all 3 of those, and we've tried to maintain the student programs as the #1 priority. Going forward, this has been hard because we've had to, I hate to use another word, but we've had to violate some of those lenses. We haven't been able to give the raises we've wanted to. We haven't been able to protect all the student programs that we've offered. And I would say class size ratio is a student program, so we've had to violate that. And it's been hard. The biggest concern I have is I think it's affected a number of people, their jobs, their livelihoods, and that's not something we want to do. These are our people, right? But what's worrisome to me is we haven't even seen some of it. Coming in the fall, when people come back to school and they see the class size ratios and there's 2 or 3 more kids in the classroom and they're bunched in there a little bit tighter, that's going to be difficult and it's going to be painful. And I think that part's going to be worrisome. I think it's already been hard. I think it's going to continue to be hard until we can get more funding or until something is done.
Good point. Well, we'll turn it back over to Dr. Faust to sign us off.
Okay, and I just want to reiterate that point that Jonathan just made. All our eyes are on Austin and what they do with the public school funding. We are thankful and grateful that there'll be additional funding because we absolutely need it. The majority of that funding that we receive from Austin, as we've shared many times, the majority of that will be directed towards compensation for all of our faculty and staff. And so that's really important to note. The structural changes that were referred to earlier, we won't be able to undo those at this time because the state's not providing enough funding to close that gap on the inflationary costs. We'll continue to monitor closely, continue to advocate for additional and adequate funding for public schools in Texas. And again, we're going to do everything we can to take care of our student programs and our faculty and staff. So please join us in advocating to support public schools in Texas and to provide us with that adequate funding. We need your help and we need your support on that concept and that idea. I want to thank you for the privilege of your time this evening. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sending in the questions. As Mr. Telsey said, those questions we didn't get to this evening, we'll respond to in writing. So we appreciate it. Please continue to help us with our culture of engagement in ISD and supporting our students and our faculty and staff. Thank you and have a good evening.